Have you ever felt like you've been beating a dead horse over and over again? Well, that's how it felt watching Toei revive Gavan over and over. Now, don't get me wrong, I love some Gecky Gavan, but Super Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity just isn't it. Metal Heroes as a brand has gone through many different revivals, and with Project Red, it seemed like Toei was ready to go all in on fully reviving Metal Heroes with a modern take. However, Infinity has a bunch of issues, so let's talk about it. Right off the gate, we gotta address the biggest elephant in the room, the pacing. This show has probably the worst pacing I have ever seen, and believe me, I know pacing issues. I have watched all of One Piece. The show follows a very predictable format for most of the early half. We have a Reiji-focused episode, Bushido episode, Luminous episode, and the cycle repeats. And while it does give us time to focus on said Gavan, it kinda shafts the other ones in the process just because that's how the show is made. With the multiversal lore that the show itself established, by the way, half of the cast never interacts with each other for the majority of the series. So instead of feeling like you're watching one connected story, it feels like you're watching 3 separate shows that occasionally remember that they're all connected. And due to that, each episode feels disconnected to the main plot, if you even want to call that a main plot since it's only relevant for like 5 episodes. Meanwhile, the other 20 episodes feel like filler with their own self-contained stories that they'll sprinkle in just a little smidge of something plot related in the post-credit scene to keep you engaged. But in reality, that post-credits scene for the most part means absolutely nothing, and then we just go back to the status quo the very next episode. And oh boy, does that return to status quo really give you tonal whiplash. You can go from an episode where Reiji pours out all of his rage into fighting Death Gavan, putting his life on the line, and giving everything, to an episode about Patron trying to stop an Uber Eats driver from blowing up a building. Which, yes, while this is a great Patron episode and makes him a bit more than just another Bulk and Skull type character, it feels extremely off-putting, especially after what it followed. And then the plot barely goes anywhere with him taking the Gavan test and being Reiji's rival. It's kinda just mentioned in one episode, then you get this, and then it's never really expanded on. Leading to his biggest contribution being taking down Hiromu to activate the mechas in the final fight. Which I guess is something. Now when we do get to see the emotional moments, they just don't stick around. Episode 7 ends with Reiji going all out against Death Gavan. Episode 8 starts by showing that he's now traumatized by that fight and the Emorgear syndrome that Mikage mentioned. Finally, some actual consequences, except they never actually do anything with it. Instead, the episode shifts to Bushido and Infinity fighting for like the 3rd time in the series, all because some android ZEZTZ knows shot him and then took control of him. The most they really did with the trauma is say that ZEZTZ idolizes him, but that barely had anything to do with the Death Gavan stuff. It was more so just a thing that Amo brought up to kind of get Reiji over what Mikage said. Reiji's trauma is introduced and basically just shoved aside for no apparent reason other than they just wanted another dumb fight. However, the biggest offender of this has to be episode 14. We finally get Reiji and Death Gavan finding it out right in front of Kiki and Koto, who up to this point have been completely disconnected from the Death Gavan storyline. Reiji is ready to arrest Mikage for his crimes, but he gets away. And the girls, having zero clue what's going on, naturally ask what the hell is going on. And then the episode ends. No explanation, no follow-up, no payoff whatsoever. And the next time Reiji returns to Iota, you'd expect him to touch upon the fallout, but nope. Instead, we get a fucking filler episode where Earth is almost destroyed by some dumbass that bought a big giant meteor off of Craigslist. I'm not joking, this is an actual plotline in Infinity. That's the biggest problem with Infinity. It's so episodic that it kills its own momentum. Huge moments happen that immediately get shafted or just straight up forgotten. Characters will go through big emotional moments that will never get explored. Which is kind of ironic since the show is about emotions. Storylines are introduced to only disappear for multiple episodes, making it feel like once the show is actually moving forward, it slams on the brakes and resets back to normal. And as a result, it removes any and all stakes in the overarching plot. But it isn't just the story that suffers from this, the characters do too. The show constantly acts like everyone's past is this big giant mystery that needs to be unraveled. But instead of actually expanding on it and making it interesting, the writers never expand on it. Which makes it seem like the writers have literally no clue what they actually want to do with these characters. And ZEZTZ is easily the biggest example of this. Bushido's entire character arc relies on understanding his past. Yet the show just keeps on vague posting about it. Literally all we know is that the girl he got his name from looked like his commander, and that's why he admires her. That's basically it. The funny part is that we already knew this from the press conference before the show even aired. The series keeps teasing that there's something deeper, but refuses to actually expand on it. So Bushido ends up feeling like he's almost in the same exact place for the entire show. And it gets even more repetitive when you realize that every Bushido episode follows the same exact formula. He's an android who believes that he doesn't understand emotions. He runs into the villain of the week, they piss him off in some way by either manipulating emotions or saying something along the lines of, "You wouldn't understand how I feel," and then suddenly he's forced to confront the fact that he might actually have emotions. By the end of the episode, he learns to cherish those feelings despite not knowing how to properly express them. And that's the problem. It's the same episode over and over again. Instead of building off the last episode and showing how he's slowly becoming more human, the show keeps resetting him back to square one so they can retell the exact story again. And after the third or fourth time, it just starts to feel like the writers just don't know what to do with him. Now, Kiki and Koto's backstory does get expanded a bit more than ZEZTZ's, but the difference is that their story doesn't rely on a backstory to really expand on it. We just really need to know that they're besties, maybe a little bit more than besties, and the story makes sure to show that in every single one of their episodes. You see how even when they fight like real friends, they easily make up and work together to take on the Emon like real friends. You see it in how when Kiki is kidnapped by an alien, Koto is willing to team up with a person she barely knows to find her. And when they do find her, she knows exactly how to bring her back to reality, sparking her curiosity and bringing that joy to the forefront. And then each of these episodes gives us a glimpse of their backstory, even though none of it was ever needed for you to completely understand their story. So when the big episode happens where Kiki loses her memories due to Koto taking over the mantle of Gavan, you feel the emotions Koto is feeling at that moment. That sense of loneliness, as we knew that they were close, so she just felt lost without her. And that sense of loneliness lands because the show spent time showing us how close they were, instead of constantly telling us there was some mysterious past waiting to be revealed. And flipping that entire narrative, we have to talk about Kunai, because somehow the show managed to make its newest member feel like the least important character. REIWA's entire introduction felt incredibly rushed. The whole purpose of an extra hero character is to shake up the status quo, while also giving the audience a cool new character, and let's be honest, sell a brand new shiny toy. The problem is, Infinity barely has a status quo to shake up in the first place, and the one opportunity it does have to change things, it gets wrapped up in like an episode and a half. Imagine if Kunai actually spent time clashing with the other Gavans. Maybe he unintentionally ruins their plans due to a misunderstanding between the three of them. Maybe he's secretly spying on Reiji while quietly helping him in the shadows, literally fitting with his ninja motif. Let him build an actual relationship with each of the Gavans before finally joining them. Instead, his whole arc gets wrapped up in an episode, and ever since then, he's basically gotten the Sakito treatment, except somehow it's even worse. Like, at least Sagito had actual character moments like the soccer episode with Gemba, a compelling, interesting backstory, was a sort of enemy to the Boon Boongers at first, and then Bune Diesel actually had cool mecha combos that gave him hype moments. REIWA has barely had any screen time since his introduction, and has slowly been reduced to comic relief, with his defining personality trait being that he has a wall fetish, which doesn't even get introduced in the actual show itself. Instead, the weekly side special, which honestly ended up being more interesting than the actual show itself. Point is, he's there to sell you a $5 toy and then magically have the solution to create the emotional SENTAI Gavengers by episode 20. Now for the big man himself, Reiji. I'll be honest, I have no big qualms with Reiji. I don't think he's anything groundbreaking or revolutionary, but he does get the most focus out of the four Gavans, which I hope he would. It'd be pretty awkward to have the show be called Space Sheriff Gavan Infinity and the show never focus on him. I think he's a cool protagonist that is fun to follow, and I love his rivalry with Mikage. The way Mikage constantly plays psychological games with him made for some genuinely compelling moments. Reiji's hesitation to take him down was another aspect I really enjoyed. Although I do wish that the show had explored that conflict a little bit more instead of moving on so quickly. But nonetheless, this man was a cool character with some hype moments. Every Reiji episode for the most part was a 10 out of 10, but then would just never follow up with anything major after it. Point is, I don't hate nor love Reiji, he's kinda just that safe, cool, shonen-like protagonist. Perfect for the demographic. But now that we've gone through all four of the main Gavans, let's talk about everyone else. Because this is where the cracks really start to show. This show has way too many side characters. And here's the thing, I don't even dislike the side cast. They just simply are not important. They just kinda exist. Take Daisuke for example. Outside of being Reiji's right-hand man, he almost has no relevance to the overall story. To be fair, I understand why. The whole he'll suffocate on other planets limitation makes it hard to naturally include him in the action, but that's a self-imposed restriction the show puts on itself. They could have given him an oxygen tank or something so that he could fight alongside Reiji, which in return could give us a tense moment. For example, they're fighting one of the crab monsters and they snap his oxygen tank and Reiji has to decide to continue to fight or retreat to save his friend. In fact, they could have done something similar to this when Reiji meets Death Gavan for the first time. Daisuke is taken out in the first part of the episode and then it's just a narrative tool to bring up Reiji's mentor. That's his biggest contribution to the show. Instead, they could have put him in a temporary coma that fuels Reiji's anger and makes him want vengeance against Death Gavan. It would also give us a satisfying payoff when he finally beats him. Now, Amo doesn't really fare any better. She suffers the same limitations as Daisuke, but on a much deeper scale. She usually falls into one of the three categories: damsel in distress, exposition machine, or completely irrelevant to whatever is happening. Even in the episode that sets her up to be this badass leader, she ends up needing to be rescued. Thankfully, she has a little bit more relevancy than Raya's sister, who I genuinely forgot existed until working on this video. Agi, on the other hand, is your standard assistant character. She's cute, she's likable, and honestly, every scene she's in is pretty enjoyable. The train episode especially gave her some surprisingly emotional material and was probably the strongest showcase of her character. As for the other two Gavins we've seen, they're kinda just there. They really haven't expanded on them enough for me to have an opinion one way or another. But by far, the best side character in this entire show has to be Fade. This man was introduced as someone hired to kidnap a family. Except after finding out that the father was abusive, Fade not only let the family go, he literally buys them a ticket so they can return home safely and then steals from the father. That's just an absolute Chad move. When he first appeared, I figured he would be a one and done character. Instead, he kept on showing up in Luminous's episodes and somehow became one of my favorite characters in the entire series. Then the show reveals that he threw away a university education so that he could stay home and take care of his widowed grandmother, who has dementia. And to support her, he turned into a phantom thief. It's honestly kind of insane that this side character has more depth than some of the actual heroes. And the best part is, the show actually follows up on the dementia. When Kiki loses her memories, Fade is one of the characters most affected by it because he knows exactly what it feels like to lose someone you care about. That's real character writing. In all honesty, Fade has gone through more meaningful development and completed more character arcs than Bushido. And honestly, most of Team Infinity outside of Reiji too. And then the Emons. I'll keep this short because I know everyone has this same complaint. These guys feel lazy in so many ways. They are all the same exact monster, just with different attachments. And the thing is, they come from emotions, and you could have played into that by still having them be the same, just act different or have different effects on people. Like if you have the grief emotion, you could have the Emon touch someone and they feel depressed or lose the will to fight or something. It's just a missed opportunity. And finally, Death Gavan. I honestly felt like him and Azazel were very underwhelming villains. Death Gavan's presence really just feels lackluster, like you know that he's making moves in the background, but the show doesn't show it or even make it feel like there's any stakes to what he's actually doing. Now, I will admit the episodes that he does appear in are some of the best episodes of the entire series that flesh both him and Reiji out, but they end up kind of leaving you empty afterwards because you know that shit ain't gonna matter, or that it's not gonna be brought up for another 7 episodes later. And Azazel is just kind of like, what? This entity just kind of pops up towards the end of the show, like the show doesn't put it on full front at all, he just kind of shows up. So when he does finally show up, it feels random, and it feels like the show just gave you a massive lore drop right at the end of the series. As for the final battle, it was cool, but it felt extremely rushed. We saw the 3 other Gavins take on their main criminal in literally 5 minutes, something that could have been done in the previous episode. Then they could have given us a full dedicated episode to Reiji versus Mikage. Now, I'll admit this was a cool fight, especially with all the Gavins joining in and the anime scene, but the fact that he kinda just gave up towards the end, I don't know, that just really doesn't sit right with me. It reminds me a bit of how GOZYUGER ended, but instead of being a full circle moment, you just feel unsatisfied. And then he literally gets taken over by Azazel and then gets taken out. I don't know, that just kinda rubbed me in the wrong way. Like, as cool as it was to see that laser blade moment, it is not fixing that ending. Overall, the villains just felt lackluster and left zero real impact on the show in my opinion. At the end of the day, the show isn't that bad. It has some genuinely good stories mixed in, especially the Reiji and Luminous stories. However, when the show misses, it's an absolute slog to sit through. My biggest complaints boil down to some of the story executions and the show having way too many cast members to give each of them time to shine. But now it's time for Omega Horn, and just from the trailer alone, it has me way more interested in Omega Horn than Infinity. And as a lifelong Pokemon anime fan, I am hoping that the Pokemon writer will take full advantage of this series. But with that, let me know what your thoughts are on the series in the comment section below. And while you're down there, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. And with that, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I'm FalPlays, and I'm out. Peace.